The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, May 16th, and I am Caroline Bailey, a Professional Development Coordinator for the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to Day 2 of our Trauma-Informed Care training. Our presenter today is Dr. Karen Harvey, and before we begin, I'd like to go over a few things about the webinar. All participants are in listen-only mode. There are two options to listen to the webinar, by computer and by phone. If you look at the panel interface on your right labeled Audio, you can click either computer or phone to switch for the best option. There is a handout for this training, which can be found in the handout section of your webinar panel. We will be recording the webinar and posting it on DDA's YouTube channel. Additionally, questions can be typed in the question or chat box in the webinar panel, and we will get to those towards the end of the presentation. We also had two questions come in at the end of the webinar yesterday, so we're going to start by answering those. The first question we had was, whatever happened about the shower situation at Rosewood?
Well, I don't know. That was a very good question. Maybe I had all day and I should have found the answer, but I can tell you that Rosewood got closed. And so, there's no more of those kind of situations there. And wherever there are institutions, and I have spent time in a number of states where institutions are still alive and well. I was in doing a training at a place called Choate in an institution in Southern Illinois 3 weeks ago. I've trained in a number of places in Texas, and people have their own showers. We're no longer using these methods, but institutionalization is still very damaging. It's not the out and out horrific abuse it was, and every facility is highly regulated. So probably I would assume that Rosewood at some point transitioned because they had been sanctioned by the Department of Justice. So I'm sure that at some point they moved to individualized showers. I never saw that though. But I know that in the other places I visited, there are, less horrific procedures going on. But the problem is, in this country, there is still a great deal of institutionalization. And it shocks me when I see it. And I've seen it many times. And yeah, the conditions are not as horrific, but people are still segregated and isolated in ways that are not good. And in that one institution at Choate, about 6 weeks ago, there was an abuse case that was really bad. And somebody was really hurt, physically abused by staff. Those situations are still going on. And, we think, okay, this is just the very old people. And it is. There's a lot of old people with a lot of trauma who had their childhoods in institutions. But there's also younger people who've had residential placements, and there's people in different states institutionalized, and there's even small institutionalizations going on here. So I know this is not everybody's view, but I feel like segregating people in this way is very damaging, even though the conditions are much, much better. So thank you. That's an important question, and the evolution of things. Thanks.
Wonderful. And our second question is, how can I help someone whose father died, but they cannot understand the death?
So you don't know that they can't understand the death, right? This is a good question. How do we know that that person doesn't understand? Have they not been told at all? Or are we assuming that they can't comprehend it? I don't know if this person's still here. So I can just elaborate if they're unable to respond. My experience is that sometimes we think people don't know, and they do. And they know a lot, and they sense things. There's a great level of emotional intelligence, right, among many, many people with intellectual disabilities that we don't measure, we don't see, but that acute sensitivity and awareness and emotional connection is there. And oftentimes people do know. And I think it's really helpful to talk to them. There's several things, and this is a really good question. Number one, people should be involved. They should know, and they should be involved in the rituals that we have for grief. You know, the funerals, the memorials, even if it's a Zoom. I think it's really important that people not be left out of the grieving and the ritual and the memorialization of the person, because people know. We have to assume intelligence. People are way smarter than we realize. And my guess is, unless he hasn't been told or she hasn't been told at all, they probably do know something is up and something's not right. And if they've been able to overhear things, my guess is they understand, because lots and lots of people understand way more than they're able to communicate. So I think talking honestly and helping that person to connect with other relatives and talk about it, have them talk to that person if they're non-speaking, is probably the best way to go. People shouldn't be left out, right? And we shouldn't assume that they don't know or get it. They just can't express. So thank you. Now I'd like to open it up. I know we have this slide here, but I wonder if there's any more questions from yesterday.
There's not, but the person did just respond that the person did get to attend the memorial and funeral, but they still look for their father and are still confused.
Oh, thank you for that information, because I didn't quite know the situation. I'm so glad they attended the memorial, and you know, they're looking for them. Well, let's take a minute. How many of us have lost somebody in our life that we pick up the phone to call, and all of a sudden we realize we can't call them, or we look for them? Oh, yeah, they're not coming because they're not here anymore. Human life is hard, and this person's looking for their father with hope after hope after hope. But I'm sure in their heart of hearts that they know. And I have something you can use on my website. It's KarenHarvey.org, Karyn Harvey.org. There is something called the Goodbye Book. And for about 20 years, I've used it. And some of the people I've worked with have used it, and some people in different places have used it for grief, where you can go through page by page and really process the loss with that person. You talk about what that person meant to the person you're supporting. Also, you can talk about, and there's all kinds of little questions that you can go through together and maybe piece together and try to figure it out. But you know, give some answers that you think are there. Maybe another relative can be involved. Just honoring the person who's lost, and also honoring the value of the person receiving support in their life. And that may be helpful. That may be helpful. Doing some exercises might work. Another grief exercise that I've done is to have a box and put a message to the person who's died in the box, and you can decorate the box, like get a blank box from Michael's and paint it with the person, and just do something to honor it and put a message, I love you, Dad, or miss you, Dad. And these little exercises kind of help people to come to some kind of closure with it. Or, I mean, closure is often not achieved, right? We can't just be okay with the fact that we've lost people we love. But so that's probably the wrong word, but to have some kind of sense of dealing with it, right? So that's a beautiful question. Thank you. That's sad, and there's hope after hope, but I'm sure in their heart of hearts they know. Thank you. It's so wonderful that you're so caring and so concerned. Thank you. So if there's no more questions, and we'll stop a little bit more for questions, just to recap, we looked at all the sources yesterday of trauma in the lives of people with disabilities, and we kind of concluded to assume trauma. Most people have been bullied. Most people have been excluded. We've gotten all kinds of different life experiences, and we see the high rates of sexual abuse of people with disabilities, and so many things that people have been through. And they are impactful. And they really do affect, I mean, we all are affected by the traumas we've gone through. So we have to look at people as not less sensitive or less receptive to life's hardships, but more impacted, because they have a smaller circle of support. They have less activities, less friends, less people in their lives. So they're way more likely to be in a loop of remembering in ways we don't even know, right? To be really raw. So that task at hand becomes really supporting people. And we talked about the importance of safety and people feeling safe, and the importance of connecting. And we're going to talk more today about the good stuff, about how people heal. And we have all seen people heal. But I wanted to talk about two more just areas in which people are affected. And just to take a minute before we go into all the positive stuff, and we will go into lots of positives, but take a minute and let's talk about secondary trauma. The fact that staff working with people with trauma, that's its own kind of trauma. And staff can absorb the trauma without even realizing it. We call that secondary trauma, right? Or vicarious trauma. Laura Lipitsky wrote an important book called Trauma Stewardship. For a long time, they looked at secondary trauma as just what affected like therapists working with vets and people who were, you know, in the ER, the nurses and the docs. But really, it's so important to recognize that the frontline worker gets the biggest hit of secondary trauma, right? That person who's with the traumatized person day in, day out, day in, day out. And that's something I believe we need to start addressing as a field, is the trauma of staff and how staff are absorbing it. Also, the trauma staff bring to the table, right? Their own life experiences and how that impacts them as well. So let's look at what staff need. We're asking staff to support people who have had a lot of trauma, who may be easily triggered, who may be in a state of hyperarousal, who may be, you know, hypervigilant and focused and agitated, or maybe re-experiencing things and having nightmares. All these symptoms are very hard to deal with. And let's look at, what does staff need? And I believe the staff really need trauma-informed management. And what is trauma-informed management? That's a whole nother training that I do. I love doing that. But I think it's you know, just some important points from it is recognizing that the staff are working in very difficult jobs. And this book, Trauma Stewardship, Laura Lipitsky talked about the front line, the people doing the work every single day. And she particularly talks about people working with the homeless population and people working with folks with severe mental health issues, but that they are absorbing the trauma and they need to feel safe in their jobs. And that means, you know, consistent policies, that when there's a crisis, they have debriefing, ideally in a one-on-one situation with their supervisor where they can talk about what just happened, or maybe with a support person in the agency, so that they get a sense of being cared about when they just go through something tough. If somebody has a severe incident, they get that support, they get the debriefing, and that's really critical, that they feel that they're able to kind of predict the when and where there's discipline, so that it's consistent, not like someone's picking on me, but this other guy gets away with everything. So consistency in policy, consistency in supervision, debriefing, and appreciation. I love DSP Week. It is my favorite. But really, if we look at the tasks that we're asking staff to do and the difficulty of it, I mean, think of what we asked of people during the pandemic, right? To basically risk their lives. If we think of all that, every week should be DSP week. Every week. And the DSP really needs to know that they are appreciated and that that support is there, and that, you know, people understand how hard it is what they do day in, day out, right? And the emotional toll it may take, particularly when you're working with folks whose trauma is very raw. So I just wanted to take a minute and talk about that, because to me that's very important. When we look at trauma, we're asking staff to support people on a deep level, right? Because people have had these, you know, years of being bullied and years of being excluded, and sometimes sexual abuse and sometimes physical abuse, and sometimes they are being tested. The individuals that we're supporting are testing the staff, right, in all kinds of ways. And maybe somebody who already, maybe a staff person that already has a history of being discriminated against racially, has to endure somebody calling them a racial slur. And what do we say? I've been guilty of this. Oh, don't worry, don't take it personally. You know, he doesn't mean it. Yeah, that's just his mom. She's a racist or whatever, right? And we just tell people to let it roll off of them, but they have their own trauma, and that can really hurt and be a trigger. And we still ask so much of people on so many levels. So we need that, you know, to give that extra support to the DSP, that extra appreciation and that extra care. And I just really, to me, it's very important that we look at that as well, and that secondary trauma. So that's one more aspect of trauma in our unique field. And you know, it's very difficult when we have, because we have people in all kinds of shifts, right? We have people awake overnight. We have people who are, you know, on the weekend, and many people don't get to see their supervisor. Maybe they just see emails or they just see texts, and they're not able to really talk to their supervisor about what's going on. And studies show that face-to-face supervision is very important as well. I know we've had a crisis in staff turnover. You know, we've had a lot of difficulties. And I think well, the organizational developmental research shows us, and one thing we can focus on is figuring out ways to have face-to-face supervision. That's another way we can support staff with the trauma that they are absorbing. And having that, even if it's FaceTime or whatever, that's really critical, as well as having staff feel that they're a part of a team. You know, often in those isolated situations where they have a different shift, or where people are working several jobs, which is most people, right? They're not really connecting, and they're only getting direction and correction. They're not always getting that consistent support that's needed. So these are several things to look at in terms of how we can have trauma-informed leadership, how we can support the DSP in getting what they need to provide these supports, and how critical that is. So thank you. Next source of trauma that I wanted to talk about before we move on to all the good stuff is the family trauma. Families have their own trauma, right? Families have so much on them. It begins with the diagnosis, right? And wow, that's so scary for some people. And families need so much support. And I have not always been as understanding of the family trauma as I should have been, right? There's been times when I totally missed it. I remember one family that we worked with, and they were very, very demanding. They were both medical professionals, and I, at that time, was supervising nursing and psych. They were insisting that the behavior plan have restraints, and we were trying to tell them we were restraint free and we weren't going to be restraining anybody, but they continued to insist that we use restraints. and and that we were doing it all wrong, and that their son really needed to be safe in that way of being restrained. And we're like, we don't do that. And then, you know, they were very critical of all the nursing services, and they were, you know, they would call the doctor and get the meds changed, and the nurses wouldn't know about it. And they were then complaining to our boss about all of us on a pretty frequent level. So there was a lot of back and forth, right? There was a lot of contention. Their son had autism, has autism, regressive autism. So it's very tragic. When they told their story, you know, I should have recognized then the level of trauma that it was, because they said to us, you know, he was fine. He was walking, talking, laughing, interacting. And then at around age 2, he stopped talking. He even couldn't walk as well. He totally shut down. And I've heard this from so many people. You know, I've heard this, and it's tragic. And my heart goes, if there's any of you out here who have experienced that, that's so hard. So many families have said to me, we lost them, you know, at that point. And you know, there's a lot of documentation of this in the last 30 years or so. But before that, we never saw that. I never learned about that in school. So this family, you know, was sharing that their son was developing on your basic trajectory, or hitting all the milestones, and then boom, totally shut down. And he was in a residential school, which was very, very restrictive, because he had been kicked out of several schools, and because he was aggressive from time to time. And that's why they wanted him to be restrained. And so he came to us at our agency, supporting folks, and they loved their son so much, right? They were very devoted to him. And as I said, very, very critical of us. And we were having our meeting, and he actually had had a fairly good year. And we were having our yearly meeting, and we were all sitting around. And we're talking about how many holes he puts in the wall. And we're like, yeah, George has, you know, really just torn that house up, but we're going to figure out, you know, what to do, how to reinforce the walls. We're just talking about how to kind of patch it up in a way that the landlord won't kick us out, right? Because it wasn't our house. It was the names of the people being supported were on the lease, and we were leasing it. And we're talking about this, and all of a sudden the mom, who's a very established professional in the medical field, well known, usually very, very together, all of a sudden she bursts into tears and starts crying. And she's sitting at the table sobbing like that. And she says, "You're going to kick him out. I know you're going to kick him out." And we all just look at her. And we're kind of waiting for her husband to turn around and comfort her. But he just shuts down. He just completely puts his head down, won't look at her, won't look at us. He's just like that. And everybody's kind of awkwardly silent. And then I try to, you know, as you can tell, I'm always the one who wants to talk, like, oh, it's okay, don't worry, we're not kicking him out. We're not even talking about kicking him out. We're just talking about what to do about the house. We love George, you know? And she's like, no, you don't. You're going to kick him out. And that's when my eyes were opened. And I was like, oh my goodness. All those rejections, all those times that he was kicked out of those schools for being too aggressive, so much trauma for her. And so much trauma for the husband, because you could see him totally shut down. He couldn't even comfort her. He couldn't look at her. I was like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So I started to realize that all these conflicts, all these kind of controlling things that they were doing were out of their trauma. You know, they felt horrible that he wasn't at home, and they would say that sometimes, well, we know we just can't keep him at home, you know, kind of saying that in a way we never brought it up. We didn't want you to keep him at home. You know, this is what we do. We're here. And their guilt and their bad feeling, and then their trauma from all the times that he was rejected, they were rejected too. And I bet many of you, some of you may be family members, and some of you may work with family members, right? And often there's that misunderstanding. And I realized, wow, all these times that people can get so critical or whatever, so much of that is their own trauma. And I started to try to work differently with families. I started to try and spend more time with families, understanding the trauma of families. I actually started volunteering and then ended up for a short time running a mom's group, mothers of kids with disabilities of all different ages, adults, a lot of them, and children. And that was so wonderful. I really learned a lot. It was a group that Diana Morgan had started years ago through the ARC Baltimore. It was so, it was always so moving for me when I saw the struggle of the moms and the trauma that they had been through, and the ways they were just, you know, forging through and fighting for their kids and fighting to make things better and fighting the systems and fighting for services. And it was always so just mind-blowing for me to see. And I'll never forget, this one woman came in, new person. We used to have food, and everybody would get, you know, some food and get their plate, and then we'd sit around in a circle. And this one woman came in, and she was new, and we were in our circle. Everybody has their food, and everyone introduces themselves for the new person. And she bursts into tears, and she just starts crying. And she says, my daughter's just been diagnosed with Williams syndrome. And she's crying. She had a 1-year-old. And I launch into, you know, you're getting to know me by now. Oh, I can tell anybody anything. Oh, I have worked with people with Williams syndrome who do so well, and it's great. And they, oh my gosh, you know, I love people with Williams syndrome, you know, saying all the wrong things, right? And she just looks at me and she's still crying. And then the other moms step in, and they're like sharing their stories of when they got their diagnoses and when they realized something wasn't right. And they're telling her, you know, the best doctors and the best kind of services to start early. And she stopped crying. By the end of the group, she was smiling and nodding. She'd written everything down. And I thought, I will never understand the profound difficulty and that unique trauma. And I was so humbled and so grateful for the other moms who could help her so much. I realized, wow, it's not easy. Oof. So when we work with staff, we know the staff are absorbing trauma on some level. And when we work with families, we see that there's, you know, impact as well. So much impact that both groups need support, need sensitivity. You know, when we work with individuals, we're also working with their family. You know, we can't separate really. And we have to look at that whole family system, is my feeling. And then how about us? You got to take care of yourself. This is tough work, right? You're juggling all this stuff. You know, some of you are coordinators who are, you know, right there with people, trying to help them, trying to look at what's going on with them and getting stressed out. Some of you are, you know, supervisors. Some of you are DSPs, I'm sure. And many of you are running programs. And many of you are trying to get systems to work. And that's its own challenge. Like we said yesterday, you got to take a minute for yourself, right? So all this trauma also affects us, whatever your role is, on whatever level it is. It's so important for you to take care of yourself. And what does self-care mean, right? We used to say, do yoga, breathe, everybody breathe. We're going to do square breathing, and then we're going to do Tai Chi, and then we're going to do yoga. But actually, doing what you love is what really matters, right? And pursuing your own happiness, taking your leisure time and really taking it for you. No matter what, how much you can carve out for yourself, you've got to carve something out for just for you. So on my website, I have the happiness assessment, which is for the folks that we support, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But I also have the happiness assessment for staff. And here's where anyone can use this little fun form, and it's based on Martin Seligman's book Flourish, where he talks about 5 levels of happiness. And you can go through each level of happiness: pleasure, engagement, positive relationships, achievement, celebrating yourself, right? And meaning and purpose. And go through all of them and take the survey to write out what happiness is for you. And then at the very end is a happiness procedure that you can do for yourself on what brings you joy and happiness. And you can fill out your happiness procedure so you can become happy. Very important to take care of you. Do what you love, right? Make a little plan to have some joy in your life. Life is short. That's another thing we learned from the pandemic. Tomorrow isn't promised to anybody. We have to take time to enjoy. So I hope that all of you can just figure out ways to pursue your own happiness. If you want a little structure, it's all free. Take the happiness procedure for staff, but just do for you what you need to do, because we're dealing with folks who receive supports who have trauma, staff who have trauma, and families who have trauma. And that affects you. So please take that time for you. I hope you all promise to do that for yourself. And I'm hoping you're already doing it. So just do it more, right? Look, Memorial Day weekend's coming up. I hope you're doing something fun. But take care of you. It goes for everybody. Thank you. All right, let's talk about healing. Finally, the good stuff, right? Finally. Let's talk about what people need in order to be able to heal. What are the ingredients necessary for post-traumatic stress recovery? Post-traumatic recovery, right? Not stress. We're going to put the stress aside. Post-traumatic recovery. And I really believe in this triangle. I believe that everybody who has trauma needs these 3 things. And it really stands out for people with intellectual disabilities. Number 1, when folks have had trauma, when people have been sexually abused, when they've been betrayed, when they've been bullied, when they've been bullied by teachers or staff, not even just peers, but so much bullying goes on so many subtle levels and so many ways. We talked about that yesterday, teasing, right? When they have been excluded, when they've been repeatedly restrained, which is trauma, they need to know they're safe. They need to feel safe. People need to have a sense of safety. And that's really important. Not only do they need to think that I'm going to be okay, they need to get that message. The message from a safe staff is, I like you. I care about you. You're cool. Right? They need that message. And I believe that it's very helpful when we can say those words, when we can articulate it. So think about, we talked yesterday a little bit about staff that we know that you can give anybody to, right? The one staff that no matter how off the hook somebody is, no matter what someone's going through, they have somebody in their life and they'll calm right down. Even if you give them someone that's so off the hook, that's tearing up the entire house, after several weeks with this certain magic staff person, they calm down. Can you all think of somebody like that? A staff person that no matter what the situation, no matter who you give them to work with, the person they're working with does better, calms down, starts to try new things, develops, right? I always call that person the magic staff. That's why I said that. That's the magic staff. But also, what do they do? Let's think about that. And I bet everybody can think of someone. If you work in this field, you know somebody like that, right? Someone that you can give anybody to. And that person will really just flourish when they're with that certain staff. What does that staff do? I believe that staff communicates emotional safety. That staff communicates, you are good with me and we are cool. And I respect you. I like you. I've observed these people very carefully. And I learned many things about them. Number one was none of them ever followed my behavior plans. Right? That was the first humbling information, like, oh, they're not even having to do this. They don't do this. Maybe they throw me a data sheet every now and then, but that's about it if I get lucky. No, they're doing things on a whole nother level. They're listening. They're really listening. They're being present with that person. And people feel safe when somebody is actually present with them, right? When somebody's connecting with them and they're being really listened to, right? People feel really safe. And that's a safe staff, someone that communicates caring, someone that knows. And then the next thing people need is connection. They need relationships. So important for people to have relationships that are not paid. Right? We're going to talk a lot about that today because that's critical. People need to have a life, a social life, maybe even a significant other, marry, have love, commitment ceremonies, whatever they choose. But that's a human right. And a really good staff will figure out how to help that person connect with other people and spend time with people they care about. And finally, empowerment. People need to have a sense that they can move their own life forward, that their actions can affect things. They need to have real choices. We have person-centered plans everywhere now, which is so wonderful, but they're not always implemented. And we say, oh, we're going to work on this and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And then that person goes back to the same old life that they've had all along. But the plan looks really good. But they know. So how can we just expand people's lives so they can have some real choices, just really have impact in their own life? And how can we really understand people and understand what they need? So when I first learned about the importance of listening and the importance of really making that connection and just helping people to have a sense of control in their own life and power. Now, I learned through my mistakes, let's put it this way. And I made a lot of them. By misunderstanding people. So I'm going to tell you a story about a woman named Joanne. Some of you may have heard this story because if I do a trauma-informed behavior plan training, and Joanne is my go-to story for that because she taught me about what a real behavior plan should be. And I learned the hard way. And we made it hard on her because we didn't get her. So background on Joanne. She had been at Great Oaks, which is the institution in DC, for all of her childhood. And she had come to the agency, she had a different residential agency, and she came to our agency probably in her 30s. So she had spent a long time there. And when I first saw her, she's very, very large. She was over 400 pounds. She was missing pieces of her ear where they were scissor clipped off. And she was full of scars. And she could go from 0 to 100 in a half a second. She could get very, very upset. And she did several things, one of several things when she was upset. Sometimes she was aggressive. She might throw something at someone or chase them. So she also could be, you know, she would curse people out. She would really curse them out. She never like just punched them in the face, you know, but she would, sometimes she would lose it. And she also was self-injurious, as you could see from just looking at her. One day, she was at lunch and she wanted to sit with a group of ladies, you know, the Gabby girls, the Gabby ladies. And they told her no, somebody was sitting there. No, she couldn't sit there. She was really hurt. She went into the ladies' room. She banged and banged and banged on the mirror. By the time we got there, she had broken the glass and was cutting herself. Remember, we saw that research that said that self-harm comes from a sense of being damaged or trapped. We didn't get that then. It was a behavior. We didn't get any of her trauma. People talked about her like she was such a problem. Oh, she's such a problem. One day, a guy named Tyrone tried to kiss her. He was the gigolo of the day program. There's always one, right? The playa. He was the one. He would kiss all the girls. He'd say, "You're my girlfriend. You're my girlfriend. You're my girlfriend." And Joanne got so mad. Unfortunately, we had left the gardening tools out. She grabbed the hoe and she started screaming and chasing him, saying, "I'm going to kill you." And he ran so fast. He ran out the building, across the parking lot to a whole nother parking lot. We had to take the car to go get him. Turns out he could have been a track star. And we just kind of looked at her like, wow, she's kind of a problem. I tried to do counseling with her because, you know, I just gotten my degree. Oh, I believe in counseling. People with, you know, disabilities deserve this. This is why I went back to school. So I'm trying to do therapy with her, but she would get mad. She would get mad. She said, "You don't really care about me. You don't really care. You didn't say hi to me earlier." And she would get mad at me on a regular basis if I came in and talked to someone else or if whatever. She was kind of right. Like, I didn't care deeply enough. I didn't. I was kind of a little bit scared of her. Because sometimes she would really lose it. But that's no excuse. One day, she threw the program manager against the wall. She got really angry and shoved her really hard. And Joanne was very big, and the program manager was this skinny little person, and it hurt her. And that's when we all said, "We can't serve her. She's too dangerous. I am not proud of this." We kicked her out. We said, "We can't serve her. This is too much. She's too dangerous." And it was like, okay, problem solved. But it didn't feel right. It didn't feel good. I had a bad feeling inside of me, right? But we also had a sense of relief. We had a behavior plan for her. And the behavior plan was woefully inadequate, right? That the therapy didn't work and the plan didn't work. And the plan was that, you know, every week, if she wasn't verbally aggressive, physically aggressive, and didn't hurt herself, she could pick a bracelet or a necklace out of the little box that we had for her because she loved jewelry. And more often than not, that box got flung down the hall. "I don't want your stuff. None of you care about me. I hate you anyway." And that plan was not it. Okay. So fast forward, I had gotten my degree and I had to qualify to get my license, which takes a long time and takes supervision. And I finally got my license and I am thinking I'm going to get more money. And they didn't give me more money. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to leave. I got a job offer. I didn't even have to look. It was great. Yay. And there was another agency that hired me. And I was so excited to go there. And they said, before you do anything, I got there, gave my notice, said goodbye to everybody. I got there and they said, before you do anything, we have somebody we need you to work with. Just fill out your paperwork. Don't go to orientation. Don't do anything. We need you to start working with this person right away. And I'm like, I've got my license. I know what I'm doing. Sure, no problem. Right? So they take me to the room behind the room behind the room. Right? It's kind of like Hannibal Lecter, Silence of the Lambs. There's two really giant staff by this back room. One of them opens the door. Here you go. And guess who it was? Hi, Karen. It was Joanne. I was like, oh my goodness. The one person I had failed with, the one person I didn't get. There she was. And I had to do things differently, right? I had to figure it out. And so I just sat with her day after day. We were doing bubbles. Back then we had, these little contracts. You had to put a little toy and snap the bubble together. And she did bubble after bubble. And so I did bubbles with her. She would get like 2 cents a bubble or something horrible like that. And we put the bubbles together. And I sat with her and sat with her. And we started to really get to know each other. And she started to tell me things. She told me about being at Great Oaks. She was sexually abused from a very young age. The older boys were sometimes put in charge of the other kids, and they abused her. And then as she got older, she was abused sexually by staff. And she began cutting herself and hurting herself. And I could see that she was trying to protect herself in so many ways. In so many ways. All she cared about was staying safe. And if she could be big enough, then maybe people would be afraid of her and not hurt her. So many things she did were just about protecting herself. And so much was expressing her pain. And she had horrible pain. Her family had just dropped her off when she was a toddler. Can you imagine? So she's starting to tell me about this. And then she told me that program manager that she threw against the wall, and she was usually never that aggressive directly, like she might throw something, but she's a nice person. But she heard that program manager mimicking her. And that program manager used to do that. She used to mimic people all the time. She was a really good mimic. Usually she closed the door, but the door was open and she heard her making fun of Joanne, and Joanne heard it and threw her against the wall because so many times she was laughed at and picked on by those older boys, and then they abused her. What a trigger. We learned about that amygdala, flashing, flashing, flashing. And then she said, I didn't want to hurt her. I feel bad about that. I feel so bad. She still was feeling horrible, hating herself for doing it. It was all about her trauma. And she had one staff that she really liked. And that staff's name was also Joanne. We could call her Joanne's staff, right? She really loved Joanne. And she said to me, I have to have good staff. I can't have bad staff. So I was like, oh, that got my attention, right? Oh, okay. So you really like Joanne's staff. But these other people, like the one who's in the hospital getting a plate put in her arm because she broke it, and a little plate and a little pin with the vacuum cleaner, thunk. That's what she did to the last staff, right? And I knew what she'd done. And I said, okay, what's the difference between good staff and bad staff? She said, a bad staff will hurt you. I can't have bad staff. So all the behavioral issues, so much of what she did was about protecting herself, right? And get this, and I bet many of you will relate to this, right? She said, well, I put them through a test I do. When they first come, I have to know if they're good or bad. And so I put them through a test. She told me that. I was like, wow, what's the test? And she said, well, first thing, I like to watch the Powerpuff Girls and the Power Rangers. And if they want to watch Oprah, no, I hate Oprah. So this was back in the day when Oprah still had her 4 o'clock talk show, right? And the whole world loved Oprah. And in Baltimore, we really loved Oprah, right? We actually said she came from Baltimore, even though she was only here for like 9 months. And, you know, she said, well, I hate Oprah and I love the Powerpuff Girls and the Power Rangers. And if they tell me it's not age appropriate, that's not good. Remember, we used to say that years ago. Oh, no, you can only do age appropriate things and we need age appropriate activities. Everybody watches cartoons, please. But if the staff change it to Oprah or the news, that was strike one. They only had one TV. She had a little tiny house she lived in because she couldn't live with anyone else. People assessed that as being too dangerous. Next, she said, then I like to play games because games make me feel better. She was so smart. She wanted to play. What we know now is that playing actually rewires the brain. Playing is really good for people who have had trauma. It's actually good for everybody because your brain rewires, you're in the present, you're connecting with people, you're interacting. It's a wonderful thing, playing. So you leave your trauma behind. Anything that brings you into the present and totally engages you is so good. And it's so wonderful for people who have had a trauma history to have lots of engagement. That's why I always worry when I see people at day programs doing the same puzzle over and over again, or just coloring the same pictures and not really engaged, because engagement is so important for healing, for the brain to be active, for really enjoying life, right? And she knew it. And she said, and if they say they're too busy to play games, that's not good. So that was strike two, right? If they said, no, I can't, I got to cook, or I got to do this, or I got to do that. And then she said, the most important thing I ever heard, she said, and then I try to tell them my story I do. What happened to me at Great Oaks? So she was trying to explain why she was the way she was, which was genius, right? I want to tell you what happened to me. That's what Bruce Perry says. Not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you is the question. And Joanne was trying to tell people. And she said, and if they don't listen, they got to go. And she was very good at that piece. So what did good staff mean to her? That they really listened to her, that they interacted with her and connected with her, that they gave her choices, and they were emotionally safe. They communicated caring. And that's how Joanne's staff was. She was like, oh, honey, baby, you're good. We're good. She was always reassuring her. She was never afraid of her. She always said, don't you worry. You're fine. You're going to be fine. You're fine. So reassuring, so caring, always listening. How you feeling? How you doing? And I watched Joanne's staff and I learned and I learned and I learned. She was amazing. And I realized Joanne needed to feel safe. Joanne needed connections where people really cared. And Joanne needed some kind of sense that she was making choices in her life. And when she got that, here's what we did. We took that one staff that she liked and we helped Joanne to I'm sorry, both their names were the same. I should change the name of one of them. But Joanne and Joanne's staff interviewed, we talked HR into letting them both interview staff and creating a team for Joanne. And she was able to have a hand and have some power in hiring. We were able to create a team. She trained them in who she was. On my website, I have my book, To Celebrate Me. And that is the newest version of what Joanne did. We had a little autobiography that she made about herself and decorated it. And she gave them a copy and went over with everyone. This is who I am. This is what I like. This is what I like to do. This is what I've been through. A little piece about what she's been through, you know, where she could really train them on who she was. And that gave her a sense of power and a sense of safety. I'm in charge here. And, you know, we really showed them through Joanne's staff's modeling and through supporting them how to work with Joanne in a way that she felt safe. We did therapy with Joanne in a way that actually she really engaged, because after all that, I finally won her trust. It took me a long, long time, but I finally won her trust. And we did all kinds of work and talked about all kinds of things. And then I was able to transition her to another staff because I ended up leaving. That's another story. But when I left, she got another therapist who was wonderful and was able to make a really good transition. And I was gone and I kept up with her. I'm not very good at keeping up with people. I always say I'm going to do it, and then I don't. I only keep up a little bit. Sometimes not at all. I'm telling on myself a lot today. But I kept up with Joanne, and I had her to my house for Thanksgiving because Joanne's staff was going to have her for Christmas, but couldn't have her for Thanksgiving. And we're like, let's give her a nice experience. I never would have had her anywhere near my kids. My kids were little then. Well, not little, but you know, they were kids, and I would never have done that. But we had a wonderful Thanksgiving with her. And it was so great. I remember singing in the car with her and making pictures, and she brought me she started making bracelets for us. After, I would say, less than a year, we didn't even need the behavior plan because she had no incidents of aggression. Very early on, she had one incident of cutting, and then she hadn't had any for at least a year. She just did so well. And once she felt safe, we could see the real Joanne. We could see who she really was, which was a wonderful person who wanted to give. And she got to go all places. Before, no one would take her into the community, right? She got to do all kinds of things and go all kinds of places and had such a wonderful time. And then, I'm sorry to say, after about a year and a half, she had a heart attack and passed away, which was so tragic. Now we know with adverse childhood experiences are highly correlated with heart disease and all kinds of health problems. And often people die young. And now we know this. And Joanne, you know, had such an adverse list of adverse childhood experiences and had all that extra weight. And we had this memorial service. And the staff that was working with her, they were all really upset. People were crying. And some of the old staff from that other program came and they pulled me aside and they said, you know, she was really a piece of work. They're very upset. Wow, they're like genuinely upset. I'm like, no, she was wonderful because we finally saw the real Joanne. When she felt safe, when she had real relationships, and when she had power and choice, and felt like she was moving her life forward, she blossomed. You know, I learned so much from her. And then this fellow showed up who looked just like her. And she used to tell us she had a twin. We were like, really? Wow. But he was her twin. And he said, I could never find her. And that was so sad. So I've tried to help people reconnect with family. I learned since then, you know, which is easier now with the internet, but I did learn that you have to vet them first. I highly recommend that. There's a story about a grandmother I don't even want to tell. She had a gun. Oh, well. So, you know, I learned so much from Joanne, and she taught us to listen, to respect, to care. In fact, at that time, we trained all the staff in active listening, and our incidents went way, way down. And it was really significant. So at this point, I think since I don't think I last time I only had questions at the very end, and now it's been 1 hour. So I think I'm going to stop and see if there's any comments or questions and then go back, if that's okay. Just give a little extra time for question and answers, since I didn't quite realize that there were extra questions yesterday. So I want to do that
Absolutely.
today.
So we actually don't have any right now, but if people want to put them into the question box, we'll be able to get to them for the next set.
And if not, great, I'll just keep going. I'll keep telling more stories. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to give that chance just in case. We'll give it 1 more minute. You know, I have this quote that I wrote down every time I hear Mel Baggs' video, which has been like hundreds of times because I almost always show it when I give a talk and I have some time. I always hear something in a different way. I was so grateful to Dawn Davis Brodeur, when she introduced me to that video and we started to hear that voice of Mel Baggs. And Mel said, being erased is the true nature of hate. I always use the quote, what she says after that, rage is nothing in comparison with erasure. But then when she said being erased is the true nature of hate, that one hit me this time, because I thought, wow, how many times are people erased? Not counted, not seen, not included. And that's perceived as the true nature of hate. Wow. So I'm going to show my screen again then. Can you all see my screen again?
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, great. Okay. So this triangle has been just so helpful and so important as guidelines. Like, let's just, it's very simple, but let's look to see if these 3 components are in place for people. Do they perceive themselves as safe? Are they connected? And do they feel empowered? Do they feel like they have real choices, or is everything scripted? Are other people in control of every aspect of their life? Because that breaks your spirit, right? That breaks your spirit. So I want to talk about connection, because I believe connection is one of the most important things in human life, right? And more research is showing us this. So the Harvard Men's Study was done over 75 years. They had 4 principal investigators. The first 3 died. It wasn't like foul play. They just died of natural causes because it went on forever. So they took men who went to Harvard and were very, had a small group from Harvard. These are people with a lot of opportunity. And then they took men from the poorest section in Boston, right? And they followed them all. They followed a large group, 724 of them, through their entire life. And they continually surveyed them. Some of them they started as teenagers who were at risk youth, right, from that poor section. Others they started when they were college students from Harvard. And they're taking all kinds of data on them throughout their whole life. They're constantly surveying them. How happy are you with your life? How important is do you feel you are in the world? How much do you make a difference? How fulfilling is your life? And they also surveyed their friends and family. They took a bunch of physical measures constantly, really got tons of data on these folks and followed them throughout their lifetime. There was a president, one of the people from Harvard became president, and they went through every aspect of their life. And then at the end, how fulfilling was your life? How happy are you with your life? How do you feel about this life? And there's a TED Talk that I highly recommend by Robert Waldinger, where he talks about this. And he talks about the study. He's the current principal investigator. The finding is riveting, right? The happiest people throughout their life and then ending up in a fulfilled way, like feeling like I had the richest and most wonderful life. They were not the richest people. In fact, some of the most unhappy people were the ones with the most money, right? So they were not the richest. They were not the ones with the highest position. They were not the people with the always consistently best education. The happiest people were the ones with the most fulfilling relationships. And that's what counts. So they were the ones who had good marriages and the ones who had a good circle of friends. And maybe they weren't married, but they had very close friends. But relationships were the biggest determinant. And relationships were everything. And when there was a bad relationship, they were the most unhappy people. So people who stayed in an unhappy marriage were the most miserable of everybody. So congratulations on anyone here who's gotten a divorce. You can do better. So, but that's really the truth, that the most unhappy people were ones who had stayed in bad marriages that didn't have a lot of love in them or just weren't comfortable. And the happiest ones were the ones who had good relationships and good family, just felt closest to people. Friends were so critical and so important over and over. This is important. This is about human life. Where are the women in the study, right? I know. They finally just started including women. Too little, too late, if you ask me, but whatever. Last week, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy said loneliness is a giant health problem, right? He said, I have this big quote here, right? Loneliness poses health risks as deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. He said, millions of people in America are struggling in the shadows, and that's not right. That's why I issued this advisory to pull back the curtain on a struggle that too many people are having. And that's the struggle of loneliness. And he went on, he wrote a piece in the New York Times, and he talked about the physical health risks of loneliness. And he said 29% increase of the risk of heart disease. Heart disease increases by 29% based on loneliness. Increased risk of dementia, 50%. Increased risk of a stroke, 32%. I mean, dementia, 50% based on loneliness. And this is what the research is showing. So let's think for a minute about the people we support. Wow. Right? How many people can you think of who actually spend time with friends they've chosen? And I'm not talking about the fact that they agreed to live together 20 years ago when they went to TGIFs and had a good time and said, okay, we'll live together. I mean, people in relationships with significant others, people with lots of friends that they've chosen that they hang out with. Sometimes people have the ability to advocate for themselves in ways that they can make that life for themselves. And that's a fantastic thing. But often that's not the case. I think it's the biggest problem we have in our field. In the Harvard study, they also said that loneliness was a bigger bigger cause in all their data of early death than obesity. People need friends, right? People need connections. People need relationships. And that's so critical and so important. And this is just the biggest problem, I believe, in our field. And David Pitoniak, I'm sure many of you have seen him. He's brilliant neuropsychologist who speaks and talks in our field, who just actually retired. And he has asserted for years that our biggest problem is how lonely people are with disabilities, with intellectual disabilities and developmental. And that isolation is the biggest piece. And now the research proves that true. This is a health problem. This is a happiness problem, right? Lonely people get very isolated. This was a problem we all experienced during the pandemic, right? I think we all saw the effect of loneliness and how hard it is on people. And, you know, that isolation was hard on everybody. And we kind of experienced it, right? At some point. Like, wow, I can't go see my mother, or I can't go see my girlfriend, or, well, this Zooming, we can Zoom, and that was nice, but it wasn't all that. So we learned, all of us, how important it is to have relationships and connections, and how hard isolation can be. So something that I think we need to look at is, do we, in our field, do we foster relationships? Are we working on relationships? Are we helping people to have relationships? There are folks who have relationships, thank goodness. But in general, they're ones who've had to fight for them, right? And then they asserted themselves and they did whatever, and they were able to fail. Sometimes people have a relationship and it fails, and then everybody says, well, you know, we tried that and it didn't work. And that's not okay. So when I first came to one of the agencies that I worked at, there was a woman there, and she was a wonderful woman. Her name was Barbara. And Barbara had a crush on the residential director, right? And that was like a joke in the agency. And let me tell you about Barbara. Barbara always looked her best. She always dressed nicely. She was very careful about her weight, to the point where we were worried it was an eating disorder. But she always looked so good, right? And always had a purse, had makeup on. She cared a lot about her appearance. She had a father who, every time she said she wanted to date or have a boyfriend, shut it down, right? Said, no, that's not happening. Nope, we can't do that. Can't do this. Mm-mm. And we just went along with it. Like, oh, well, father says she can't date. And now it was the big joke that Barbara had a crush on the residential director. Oh, yeah. Are you guys going out? Ha, ha, ha. Hey, Barbara, look who's here. And that had to hurt her. And at age 60, Barbara developed cancer. It was a serious type of cancer. She got treatment, but then they said, you know, it's not working. The cancer's spreading. And my staff and I would take turns, you know, sitting with her when she was getting her treatments. She was in the hospital, in and out a lot. And we would try to go there at the same time that The Bold and the Beautiful was on, right in the middle of the day, because she loved The Bold and the Beautiful. She adored it. And she could tell you who was sleeping with who had affairs. Oh, that's Brooke. And she was with Joe, but then she found out he's her half brother, so they had to cut that off. She would tell you these crazy things from soap opera. And she knew every relationship for the last 20 years. And she knew everything. And I realized so much of her life was about wanting a relationship. And she had kind of lost hope. And without realizing it, the agency had, we had handed over total power to her father, the guardian. This is financial and medical. This isn't like every aspect of your life. Guardianship is not designed for that. And Barbara never had a boyfriend. And then she passed away. And whew, it hit me. I was like, oh my goodness, we had her entire life in our hands. And yet we couldn't make this one thing happen that she wanted so much. We couldn't support her in it. We couldn't find that way forward for her. We didn't just sit down and try and work with Dad. And maybe somebody at some point did, and I just didn't know it. But it hadn't happened for a long time. And I was like, wow. So we started a singles group. Let's have some love. Let's have some relationships. Let's make some things happen. Because what I realized too is that what is our role? What do the taxpayers pay us for? And that is to support people with intellectual disabilities. And what does that mean? Well, oftentimes, without even realizing it, we define it as keeping people safe. Okay, try to make their life as long as possible. Try to keep them as safe as possible. Oh, okay, and now then we inched into, okay, maybe they can work, try to help them to work. And maybe the people that are really, really pushing for it, let them have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, maybe even marry, but we don't know how we're going to support that. They have to be very independent. Can't have staff. And I started to think, what does supporting people really mean? It means really quality of life. And what does quality of life mean? Well, the Harvard study shows us. It means relationships, right? It means healing through relationships. And are we doing that? Are we helping people in forming real relationships that are not paid, in finding a significant other, in finding friends to hang out with, in having that rich life where you can call someone up and just talk? And some people do, but there's so many people that are so isolated and don't. And are we focusing on that? And I started to realize that this is one of the most important things, right? And this is what we need to do. In fact, there's a study that was done, and I often talk about this study, but it's so important. It was done with vets, and they looked at people who had severe PTSD out of Iraq and people who didn't. And they looked at all the factors of their lives, their position in the armed forces, their education, their socioeconomic background. And they said, well, you had people who went through the same trauma, and some came back and they were able to resume their marriages and their relationships. They were able to go back to work. They were able to move on with their life. And yeah, I'm sure there was an effect, but they were able to resume their life and report being okay. And then there were a number of people. We saw so much PTSD with people who came back from Iraq and kind of imploded, right? Probably some of us know somebody. I know someone who, he was working with us, and then one day somebody pushed his button and he was hospitalized for a long, long time after that, and has not really been able to work since then. A lot of trauma. So they said, what are the consistent factors, right? So all those other things we said, and they also looked at their relationships. They looked at two things that ended up being the most important factors. The two factors that correlated with people who did not develop PTSD were people who did. Number one, people who were Skyping with friends and family, who were talking and interacting and having lots of, back then they didn't have FaceTime, right? But lots of Skyping and connecting, and really had a circle of friends and family supporting them, were way less likely to develop PTSD than those who were very isolated, who said, I hardly Skype with anyone. Very few people connect with me. That was number one. Number two was actually their unit. Did they feel like people in their unit had their back? Or did they feel like they couldn't trust people? If they had a very close relationship with people in their unit, then they were way less likely to have PTSD. There's a movie called The Hurt Locker, and about people, and their close relationship in their unit, like signing up for another tour and trying to stay with them, right? The intensity of those relationships and the support. And there's a documentary called The Invisible War, where you see the effects of sexual abuse when someone you were supposed to trust in your unit or your superior abused you, and the level of trauma that it caused, right? What was the factor? Again, back to relationships. And people who had a close relationship with their unit and had people from the states that they felt were really supporting them, that inoculated them against the trauma. So they had the trauma, but they didn't have the full effects of PTSD because of those relationships. So not only did the relationship help you heal, the relationship will protect you. Relationships heal. And how often do people not have them? Right? That's got to change. So if we look at the role of staff, of providing supports, what does support mean? I believe support needs to start meaning facilitating relationships. We have come to the point where we're really good at training staff in having a relationship with the person they work with. And that's great, right? That is important. We transitioned to MANT. MANT has 3 chapters on building that relationship. It's so important. We're doing so much better in really focusing on giving the DSP the tools to have that kind of really good, solid relationship and trust with the people they support. But staff quit. Staff don't stay forever. And they have the right to quit. The most important thing I believe people can do, that staff can do, is to facilitate our relationships that are unpaid. I was going to say facilitate our relationship. It can be many relationships, friendships, significant other, teaching someone to ask someone out on a date, teaching somebody to connect in a way that they can have an ongoing relationship, helping people to apologize, all kinds of things we can do to really support relationships. And if we train staff that in the notion that they're a facilitator of relationships, you coach them in having a relationship, facilitate the relationship, then help them with the skills in it, then they're not the end of the road. They're not the be all and the end all, right? They can't be, because if they are, it's going to create problems when they leave. We've all seen that. So we looked at the life of Barbara Katz and the fact that we had her whole life in our hands and she never had a relationship. And we looked at the fact that we had all the staff who didn't quite know how to do this. We surveyed people at our agency and we said, who's your friend? Who's your best friend? Who's your close friend? What's your circle? And I bet you know what our answers were. Staff, my staff, my staff, Linda, my staff, Dan. So we said, okay, we're going to have a singles group. And the way that I set it up was the dumbest thing on earth, right? I don't know if you remember eHarmony. So we did eHarmony type thing. eHarmony was, you would have a survey, right? You could fill out your eHarmony survey about what you found romantic, what you wanted in a man or a woman or whatever you preferred. And you know, you have this whole profile. So we had this whole profile. We filled it out with people, you know, interviewed them, or if, you know, tried to sometimes involve staff or whatever. We tried to get the most genuine answers we could get about what they wanted in a relationship and who they were and what they liked, what they considered a nice date, right? And then we sat down with all these papers and we matched people up, right? We matched them all up. And then we had this big event, meet your match, right? We had pizza, we had soda, and you would come in. We had sets of 2 chairs facing each other, right, in a big room. So lots of little dyads facing each other. And you would have to get a number. And you would say, oh, you're Joe, you're number 3, and you're going to meet Jane, who's also number 3. Because we had pairs of numbers, because we had paired everybody up, and we just knew who belonged with who. So everybody sat down in their pair, faced their person, ate their pizza, and after about 15 minutes, one after another, they started getting up and finding somebody that they really liked. Finding someone they really could connect to, finding someone they wanted to talk to, and started just mingling. And we learned. I was humbled. We had no idea who would want to be with who. They, oh my gosh, that's someone from my day program. Oh, I really like her. Oh, he's cute. You know, people knew. So we started just trying to facilitate dates, having lots of events. We got funding for events, opened it up for other agencies and other people, whoever wanted to. And we had our first it couple, Christine and Derek, who have given me permission to talk about them. And Christine, you know, Christine really loved Derek. They were not someone we matched up either. They found each other and they really hit it off. And we would just have them talk to other people. See, you can be like Christine. You guys tell them how you like dating. They would see each other almost every weekend, depending on his work schedule. And that was so cool. But let me tell you a little backstory. When I first came to the agency, Christine's father had died and she was devastated. And she had lost her job because she refused. She had been working in a hotel and she refused to go to work because she was so hurt. She was grieving so deeply. And that grief was so devastating. And so she had lost her job. She wouldn't leave her room. She wouldn't shower. Finally, after months and months, you know, she started to come back and she gradually went back to the day program, but it took so much. And then her aunt stepped up and her aunt brought her home for holidays and sometimes took her shopping. She really stepped up and really supported Christine, and Christine's, you know, doing better. She got a job on a crew at that point and she was doing better. And then she and Derek connected. And so they had this wonderful relationship, consistent. And a couple years went on, you know, they continued to see each other. And then tragically, Christine's aunt died. And that was devastating, right? That was really hard for her. But we expected her to shut down because she'd gotten very, very close to her aunt. And she'd always loved her aunt, but they had gotten really close. We expected her to shut down in the same way that she had done when her dad had died. And we were, you know, ready for it. And oh my gosh, we got to give her extra support, doing some grief counseling, doing everything we could. I was doing grief counseling with her, talking to her. But she kept going to work. and she kept looking good every day. And she just kept going. And I was like, wow. And I said, Christine, you're doing so great. It's so wonderful. And she said, that's because I have Derek. And Derek's my family. Right? Wow. And I was like, wow, that's what everyone deserves. As we lose our loved ones, to have our own circle. And we all find our people. We find people that are similar to us. We find our tribe. Even though I always tell my husband, he's so different, we're actually very similar. You find your people, and that's a human right. And that relationship helped her through on so many levels to deal with all of her losses. Andrew Solomon wrote a book called Far from the Tree. And he says you have a vertical identity where you're born into a family, but then what healthy human development is finding your horizontal identity, right? Finding your tribe, finding the people you connect with, maybe marrying one of them, creating your own family, having a circle of friends, having your people is your horizontal identity that gives you strength. Like, okay, this is who I am now. I'm friends with these people and I'm this one's boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife, right? And that's the strength you have. And that's identity. So I learned how important it was from Christine and Derek and the support that he gave her, right? Next, we know people need treatment, and access to therapy is a human right. And that's really important, but we have a hard time in our lives, in our world, trying to find therapists to work with us. That's why I so appreciate the ARC of Central Chesapeake, who they're able to set up a clinic and provide services and therapeutic services, as many other people are trying to do as well, but they have got it funded and they're moving forward and they're giving all kinds of clinical services. We've got a grant, we're doing training for therapists. It's the most exciting thing in the world because therapy helps and access to treatment is a human right. In particular, I found that grief therapy is so important. So at the ARC of Baltimore, we set up a healing center for people we knew had trauma where we did intensive work with them from September to June. We did yoga, we did all kinds of expressive therapies. We had a music therapist come and we did art projects. And here's Elena, who gave me permission to tell her story. Elena was always very angry. When we did a drum circle, she would say, I don't play the drums, I don't do this. When we would sing, she'd say, I don't sing. And she was always mad at us. And we knew she had had a horrible trauma. And when she was 13 years old, she had witnessed her stepfather stab and kill her mother. And of course, nothing could be worse, right? Oh my God. And we figured that she would be processing that. But what happened was, interestingly enough, what she shared with us when we really started to open up about trauma, what we found is the biggest trauma for almost everyone there was who they had lost. It was their grief. And the grief was the core of trauma. And hers was, she had a woman who was the love of her life named Mary. She was her significant other. And she said, Mary helped her. And you could tell that Mary helped her heal from the loss of her mother. Mary was that person and that love healed her, right? Just like James's love of Sarah healed him. Love heals, relationships heal. But she was always so angry and we couldn't understand why. And then one day she shared, I killed her. And she shared it in group. Even though we talked to people individually, she didn't open up, but she trusted that group. Group therapy is so powerful. She trusted that group. And she said, it was my fault. It was my fault. And she told this very sad story where Mary and she were in the group home together and, you know, they loved each other. And Mary wouldn't eat. And Elena told her, you need to eat. You need to eat. If you don't eat, you're going to get sick. You have to eat. And then Mary just got mad and stuffed a bunch of food and choked and passed away. And Elena blamed herself for Mary's death and said to the whole group, I killed her. But the group was so amazing. They formed a hug line, and one after another, they just came up and comforted her and hugged her and told her it wasn't her fault, and then kept talking to her and encouraging her. And she finally forgave herself from that group. And then we did the grief work. And here she is talking about, she made this memory box to honor with a message to Mary inside, and then people could take those boxes home and put them on her night table. And here she is talking about Mary after she's done all the grief work and made her box for Mary.
I made this for my roommate, my mentor, and I love her. Oh, good job, Mike. So good message. Okay. Dear roommate, I miss you and I love you. Good job,
See, we never saw that smile. And then she was always smiling. Just resolving that grief work was so powerful and so important for her. We couldn't get that mic out of her hands. She would be singing all the time after that. Turns out she loved old Beatles songs. And we'd be like, it's somebody else's turn now, Elena. And she really just blossomed after forgiving herself and resolving that and doing that work. Very powerful. We also want to look at how can we build up people's positive sense of self. And I think that's something we can do therapeutically, but that's also something staff can do. And it's very important for staff to be able to talk to people about who they are in a positive way. Because what happened to so many folks was during adolescence, when we're all figuring out who we are and our identities, many people were told who they're not. Oh, you're not going to get married. You're not going to have kids. You're not, so many things. You're not going to drive. And so when that critical time of identity formation was going on, they were getting these negative messages of who you're not. And Erik Erikson says during that adolescence period, it's critical to form a sense of identity if you're going to have a successful adulthood and if you're going to be able to have successful, intimate relationships as an adult. So that positive identity is so important for all of us to build and help people to heal in that way, rather than I'm the victim and I'm a person who got abused and I'm this and I'm that. That sense of self. And you could see that transition with James and James Meadors when he was talking about being a victim and all the things that happened to him. And he wore a shirt with lightning, because he wears that shirt saying lightning strikes over and over again, even though lightning's not supposed to strike twice in the same place. For me, lightning kept striking because he kept getting sexually abused. But then you could see at the end where he just got so strong and so positive, like, now I'm an advocate now. Now I do important work. He has that identity that helped him to pull forward and heal and talk about, yeah, I don't feel that shame anymore because I'm working and I'm helping others, right? Having a sense of self and identity, a sense of purpose, that's also so critical in healing from trauma. How can we support that, right? How can we help people to feel that they are making a difference somewhere, not just to be the passive recipients of our help, but to act in their world, to move things forward. Again, to have that empowerment, to be someone, and the sense of identity and self. Now, that is not the lion that ate Susie right there, right? That's how that kitten sees himself. I'm going to be great. What matters most is how you see yourself, right? How can we build that sense of identity? And that's how people can really, truly heal from their trauma. See, Daisaku Ikeda is there with Nelson Mandela. Daisaku Ikeda is a great Buddhist scholar. And Nelson Mandela is someone who survived a lot of trauma and went on to change not only South Africa, but the world. And Ikeda says, ultimately, happiness rests on how you establish a solid sense of self or being, right? How can we help people to have a sense of who they are, a sense of self, right? To feel like they are someone. to feel like they make a difference, that they count in their way. Like James, after the death of Sarah, he went on and in fact, I just had lunch yesterday with the person who supervised him and helped him to do this great advocacy work. They had an organization where he just did amazing things. And she said, I miss James. And I told her, I just talked about him this morning. That solid sense of self is what carried him through his grief, enabled him to move forward and really live the life of a hero with all the work he did. She was telling me again how he also was able to expose some abuse that was going on because he would go and interview other folks in agencies and they would tell him things because they could trust him, right? And how can we show people their best self? Sometimes we hold up these mirrors that say, here's your behavior problem, and this is what's wrong with you. And we don't mean to do that. I created that in some of the plans I wrote. Well, talk to that person about what they're not going to do today. No. How many people do you know in your regular friend circle, if you say, how are you? Do they say, I've been good today? Probably nobody. One time, my group of friends and I went on a diet. So we would say, oh, I've been good today. Other than that, we never say that. How many people do you know with a disability when you say, how are you? They say, I was good today. I was bad yesterday. And they report on their behavior. They report on what's wrong with them and how you might be seeing them versus on how they feel and who they are. I'm feeling good. Yeah, I was feeling good about what I did the other day. That's what we have to change by holding up that positive mirror to show them the best in them. Here's who you can be. Here's who you are. And that's what the magic staff did, right? They got that mirror and held it up. You are somebody. I believe in you. I see you. I see you. I hear you. I validate the importance of your existence. You are a person, not an unperson, right? And that's something we can all do. That validation, that showing people, talking to people about who they are, praising character. You're a good person, not just behavior. I believe in you. You do so much. You try so hard. Finding those beautiful strengths, and everybody has them, and praising them and celebrating them. And finally, the happiness assessment, right? I think it's so important that we help people to pursue their happiness. On my website, I have the happiness assessment, and I encourage everyone who writes behavior plans and the plans that I sign off on that we have this where we assess what makes this person happy. In addition to a functional assessment, let's look at the happiness assessment. What brings you joy? And on all 5 levels, like we talked about earlier for staff, right? The level of pleasure, passive happiness, engagement, active happiness, relationships. You know, that's a theme, right? How important friendships and significant others, if people so choose, but relationships are so critical. Achievements, how much are we celebrating ourselves? How much are we having a party and saying, yeah, Joe didn't put a hole in the wall for 3 months, let's have a party. Or just celebrating who we are. Martin Seligman says that's an important aspect of happiness, is to have a sense of achievement. And finally, meaning and purpose, another theme of today, right? Another big source of healing. When people feel they're making a difference, when people see that they're having an impact, it's so healing. It's so important. Saw that with James, right? He can move forward. So critical. So the happiness assessment, figuring out with that person what makes you happy, and then having a happiness procedure. Okay, what can we do to facilitate your joy, to help you follow your bliss, to find your happiness? We can do all kinds of things to help people heal from their trauma. We can bring them into the present by doing these things. And it's not rocket science, right? Helping people have more engagement and more joy, more happiness in their life. Having relationships, coaching them on relationship, not being the relationship, but facilitating those relationships. Doing all kinds of things to making sure people feel safe, making sure that they know that they're okay, and having real choices and real power over their life. All these aspects heal people. People get better. People have hope. People move forward in their lives when we can do this. This is trauma-informed support, right? Make sure that there's that safety, connection, and empowerment. Build that positive sense of self. Talk to people about their character. Praise those strengths, not just behaviors. Give that positive regard. Coach relationships. Do the happiness assessment. I also have a daily happiness worksheet on my website, which is basically a gratitude journal. Also, you know, just assessing what makes you joyful today. What do you appreciate? What was awesome? What made you smile? And celebrating each day. Little data sheet of goodness to celebrate. How can I celebrate this day? And there's research that shows doing gratitude journals actually makes you more energetic, more joyful, and more optimistic. These are tools we can use. Finally, Amanda Gorman says, there is always light if only we are brave enough to see it, and if only we are brave enough to be it. And here's where I have to thank all of you, because you are the light, because you've chosen this work. And you've chosen this, I bet, wasn't because of the money. It's work of the heart. So thank you for all you do. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you, thank you, thank you for the caring you give every day. You give hope, and hope changes everything. And then healing happens, and healing does happen. Thank you. And thanks for your attention. Now we can open it up for questions. Try to save a little bit extra. And I will stop sharing my screen, and we can go to questions or comments. Please feel free, just make a comment, or you disagree with something or whatever.
So the one question that we do have is, where is the happiness procedure located? If you can give your website again.
Oh, okay. So it's KARYNHARVEY, KarenHarvey.org. So my name, Karen with the Y, Harvey.org. You can get the happiness assessment there. And then we don't actually have the procedure, because what we do is we have the procedure as part of their plan. But we have a procedure for staff, so you can use that as well. So this is all on KarenHarvey.org. In addition, on that website, I have the Daily Happiness Worksheet, but I also have a number of workbooks. The book To Celebrate Me that Joanne used it's an autobiography to celebrate herself, and also that she can use to train people. And this is who I am. This is what I like. This is what's important to me, right? So, and I have my book about how I make a difference. We have a book about recovery. We have a bunch of little workbooks that people can use there as well.
And we don't have any other questions, but we do have some appreciation for today's talk, as well as some agreement about how important relationships are. But that's all we have.
Right. Yay. Thank you. We're going to make this happen, right? And yeah, it was riveting to me when I saw the Surgeon General is talking about loneliness. Oh my gosh, you know? Right on time. Right on time. All right, so thank you so much. Go ahead.
We just received one more that says, will there be another webinar about responding to crisis?
Well, I don't know. We'll see, right? We can do that, and we can talk about the crisis. Is so important to respond in a certain way, right? And using yourself as an instrument is so critical. One is not scheduled yet, but that can be done. Happy to do whatever.
We also just received another question about, is there information on your website about trauma-informed leadership or potential webinars for it?
I'm not sure. I think I just have something that says that I do that, but you can contact me through my website, and I do that training. It can be 1 hour or 90 minutes, or we can do it for 2 hours, but I have been doing it with management in different places. Really enjoy doing it with frontline managers and all the way up. But talking about, you know, that kind of trauma-informed leadership, I think, is critical if we want to put the burden of being not burden, but, you know, the onus of being trauma-informed in the supports on the DSP. We need to support them. Yeah, so I can be contacted through the website. I hope it's on there.
And then someone also was curious if you will be doing the Train the Trainer training in June. And if
I
you can maybe
will.
talk about that.
Thank you for asking. Yes, I'm very excited about that. I really appreciate DDA and Maryland for facilitating this, because to me, that's the most important thing. I love all these people that are doing these trainings now. We have a wonderful group of trainers, and you know, to be able to know that this training is going on is exciting for me. I have a manual and I have slides that I give everybody in the Train the Trainer. My request is that they have training experience in DDA, in the DD field. And we go through a, you know, pretty thorough review on the material, and then people are set up to be able to do new hire, train the trainers, and they can also do refreshers within their agencies. So to try to get the word out, thank you for asking, trying to get the word out about that and facilitate as much trauma training as possible. It's been my experience that training the DSPs in this model of trauma-informed supports really changes how people see things, because they realize, oh my gosh, they've been going through trauma just like me, right? We all have certain traumas. Planet Earth is hard. And it kind of gives them a different lens to see people through, and then to support them in a different way, right? To have a little bit more empathy and understanding. And I have seen it make a difference. And I have heard from many people that they're feeling it's making a difference. So I encourage people who have training experience to join up. Love to have you. I hope to do as many as possible, because to me, that's what outlasts me. And that's what's the most important thing, that we can just get the word out. So thank you.
Wonderful. And that's all the questions we have at this point. So if you want, I'll turn it over to you to close out.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank you, Caroline, for all the support. You're wonderful. You made my day because technology is not my strong point. So thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for being here and for the work you do. I mean, it's so important. You're all so pivotal. Remember that unseen virtue brings visible reward, right? So thank you. Thanks so much. All right. That's it.